Unsolved until today.
JonBenet Ramsey case, the best episode yet. It was 6:30 a.m. Christmas morning, and Burke and JonBenet were excited to open their presents. Burke received what he wanted, a Nintendo 64 game console, and JonBenet scored a new bicycle. As they were opening presents, JonBenet gave her father a red gumball machine. And then John and Patsy Ramsey made breakfast, where John made pancakes. And once breakfast was over, the neighborhood children entered their house, and the children played that Christmas morning. And John thought about his airplane, and in the afternoon left to go to Jeffco Airport, which is about a 30-minute drive, and he spent 2 hours or more working on his plane and packing and at the hangar and airport. When John returned from the airport that afternoon, JonBenet and Burke were playing outside, and it was about time to go to the Whites. The Ramsey family arrived at the Whites' house around 5:30 that night, and it's about a mile away from the Ramsey's house. And there was Fleet, Priscilla, Daphne, and Fleet Jr., Allison and Cliff, and Heather and Bill. At about 9 p.m., the Ramsey family left the White's house and stopped at the Walkers and dropped off a present, and then went to the Steins and dropped off a present, and then thought about going to the Fernie's house, but decided against it because it was a 10 to 15 minute drive south, and they returned home by 10 p.m. On December 26 at 5:52 a.m., Patsy called 911. Patsy told the operator that there was a kidnapping, there was a note, and her daughter was gone, and that she's 6 years old and blonde. She doesn't know how long her daughter has been gone. The note says SBTC Victory, and please hurry. And Patsy is the one that ended the call. Boulder police officer Rick French was the first to get to the Ramsey house, and he met Patsy at the door, and then John Ramsey came downstairs, and they pointed out the ransom note on the floor to the officer. And after a quick inspection of the house, the officer noticed there was no obvious sign of forced entry or struggle. Approximately 15 to 20 minutes after Officer Rick French arrived at the Ramsey residence, Fleet and Priscilla White arrived at the front door and were let in. And then John Fernie arrived, and then a little later Barbara Fernie arrived, and then several police officers showed up, and then the Reverend Roland Overstock arrived sometime after 7 a.m. Sometime around this time, either before or after, John Ramsey called Rod Westmoreland in Atlanta to arrange to get the money for the ransom. And then it was decided that Burke would go over to Fleet White's house. So Fleet White and Burke left, and then John Fernie left to go to the bank to get the cash for the ransom. And then at 8:10 a.m., Detective Linda Arndt arrived at the Ramsey residence. And then between 8 and 10, there was no ransom phone call. Sometime around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, Detective Linda Arndt asked John and/or Fleet to go and look throughout the house, and they headed down into the basement, and John showed Fleet the open window with the suitcase underneath it. And then John headed to the boiler room and the wine cellar, and John opened up the door and immediately saw JonBenet lying dead on the ground. And he knelt down, pulled off the tape from her mouth, and then John picked up JonBenet and carried her upstairs and placed her on the living room floor. And so this photograph is a crime scene photo of the white blanket and the pink Barbie nightgown that was left after JonBenet's body was removed from the room. Now, this part of the video is about presenting the facts and details of the evidence. So I'm going to begin with the autopsy report. It states that the pathologist entered the Ramsey home at 8:20 p.m. that night and found JonBenet's dead body lying on the living room floor with two items on top of her body: an avalanche sweatshirt and a blanket that you can see in this photograph. The clothes that JonBenet had on her body were the Wednesday underwear, the long johns bottoms, and a blouse with a silver star on the front that she had worn to the whites. There was a white nylon cord embedded in her neck, attached to a broken paintbrush handle tied with a special knot. JonBenet had been assaulted prior to death, and there was evidence of past molestation in the autopsy report, describing the condition of her body. There was 3+ to 4+ livor mortis and 1 to 2+ rigor mortis in the elbows and shoulders, and more advanced 2 to 3 in the joints of the lower extremities. In her digestive tract, just below the stomach, contained fragment pieces of yellow to light green tan apparent vegetable or fruit material, which may represent fragments of pineapple. And in a surprising discovery, because JonBenet's head didn't show any obvious sign of trauma, it was discovered that she had a large skull fracture. On the dining room table was a small bowl with pineapple and some milk or cream inside, with a large spoon in it, and a glass, an empty glass, with a tea bag inside of it. On the kitchen counter, there was a large black Maglite flashlight, as you can see in this photograph here. In the basement, in the boiler room, on the floor was Patsy's paint tote with paintbrushes and paint supplies. And this is also considered to be the place where JonBenet lost her life. In the basement, in the room called the train room, was a window, or a window door as I call it, because it's a window that opens like a door, and a large suitcase underneath it. Now, there's one thing to note here. Both had been moved. For some reason, somebody opened up the window and somebody moved the suitcase from being flush up against the wall to being perpendicular, like in the photograph. Now, in this episode, we're going to focus on why the person isn't guilty. And so I start off with Patsy. And the obvious reason is Patsy has no motive and showed no signs at all of abusing JonBenet. And so for her to strike out and crack her skull is unbelievable. Furthermore, there was no outside sign of an injury to JonBenet's head. There wasn't blood dripping all over or blood matted in her hair or anything of the sort. Now, there's plenty of reasons why people feel that Patsy killed JonBenet in maybe some kind of accident or overreaction because of the holidays and JonBenet had been wetting the bed and frustration. But I think the main reason people believe Patsy is guilty is the ransom note. The length of the ransom note, the writing style, the paragraph indentations, and the exclamation marks. Now here's two writings that Patsy supposedly wrote. And I'm going to look at the numerals. And so if you look like at the 4s, there's a certain style to them. And if you look at the 8s, they're figure 8s with the top of the 8 being bigger or larger than the bottom portion of the 8. And that seems to be characteristic of Patsy's writing. But when you look at the ransom note, the 8s don't look like figure 8s, even though they are figure 8s, because the top circle and the bottom circle are neatly done and are of the same size. And you can see that the 2s don't look alike, the 7s don't look alike, the 0s don't look alike, and even the 9 looks different in the ransom note compared to Patsy's writing. John Ramsey is guilty. He garroted JonBenet. He molested JonBenet. He didn't discover JonBenet's dead body in the wine cellar. He knew that JonBenet's body was in the wine cellar. He just wanted to end this ordeal for good. Now, oops. Earlier I said that I was going to present the case why each person isn't guilty. But what I meant to say was everyone but John Ramsey. Now, are you sitting down? You might want to pause this video and get a glass of water, because this next statement's going to shock you. I don't think JonBenet is John's biological daughter. If you look at pictures of Patsy and JonBenet, you can see the resemblance. If you look at photographs of John Ramsey and his older daughters, you can see that they look somewhat alike, father and daughter. But if you look at John and JonBenet, you can see that they don't look alike. They don't share certain characteristics, facial characteristics. Patsy is all about appearances, and JonBenet's name after JonBenet is no coincidence. She was trying to get him to love her, and she was born 10 years into their marriage when John's business was taking off and he was traveling in different states, in different countries, and Patsy was wasting too much money on JonBenet. And I think he planned the murder of JonBenet for Christmas, and he set up this trip to Charlevoix to pretend like, oh, we're going to Charlevoix, and I didn't plan this murder because I wouldn't want to mess up this trip. John Ramsey staged this crime scene. He made up the story about it had to do with something with his business, and he tied this knot on this broken paintbrush handle. And his story about the suitcase and the open window just proves that he's the one that did this, because no one went through the basement window. John most likely wrote the lengthy ransom note when he was at the airport that day. And everything blew up in his face on the next day when Patsy called 911 without even reading the ransom note. He didn't want the police there at his house that morning. He didn't plan any of this, and he made up the story about the basement window on the fly that day. Burke didn't kill JonBenet. He didn't strike her in the head with some bat or flashlight over some rage incident. If he would have, Patsy would have called 911 immediately. She would have been concerned more about JonBenet's welfare than if Burke was going to get in trouble for hitting JonBenet. Furthermore, neither John nor Patsy would strangle JonBenet with a garrote to cover up for Burke. And the police questioned Burke on December 26th in the afternoon, and he told them that Patsy came into his room and was looking for JonBenet, and his parents were all concerned about some issue that he didn't know what was going on when he was lying in bed. And he testified that a policeman came into his room with a flashlight. And so there's no way that he could continue to lie and make up a story about what he said, especially the way what he said. It is not a fact that JonBenet got in bed that Christmas night. Look at this photograph and look what JonBenet's wearing. This blouse or shirt or pajama top. And look at it closely. Look at the sleeve. And then here, look at JonBenet's bed. Does the bed look like she was snatched out of it? Like the pillow, it's not up by the headset. And the sweater is lying, almost falling off of the bed. And then up in the top corner there's a blouse or shirt. Isn't that the same shirt that she was wearing Christmas morning? Here, take a look and see. Compare. Now, if it is, sometime in the morning or afternoon, JonBenet took that shirt off and placed it on the bed. But then that night, she supposedly got in bed and slept and was snatched out by an intruder. What this tells me is JonBenet did not get in bed after returning from the Whites' Christmas dinner, and that Patsy and John are lying about putting her to bed. That didn't take place. What she was doing, most likely, was eating some pineapple. Look at this photograph of the bowl of pineapple and the glass with a tea bag inside of it. Does this look like an intruder put this out for JonBenet to eat? Did an intruder put some cream or milk inside the bowl the way JonBenet likes it? Did the victim advocates that morning, did they put the bowl out? Does it look like it to you? Now let's take a look at this crime scene photograph. And there's a boo-boo in here. The photographer captured his shadow in the picture. But the good news is that tells you what time of day it was, because this arrow here is pointing north. And so if you know how to read a sundial, it gives you a little bit of an idea when this photograph was taken. So north is going at that angle to the top left corner. And then just to see that, a visual, here's the floor plan. And you can see number 6 where the broken window to the basement was located, the window well. And right below that number 6, you could see an N with a little arrow pointing up. So north is up and down is south. So back to the man's shadow, it's pointing to 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon direction. And all that really matters is it was taken in the afternoon. Now what this tells us is when the police in the morning looked around the house with their flashlights, they didn't find any footprints in the snow. That's why they stated that. Because how would an intruder open up that grating, get over the snow to the sidewalk without leaving a footprint? Please subscribe if you haven't already. It helps me, and I appreciate it. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved. And wow, what an episode it was. I'll see you next weekend.